A young boy is being chased down by a group of bullies, and when he makes a wrong turn into a dead-end alley, they catch him. After beating him up, they steal his money, calling him a bastardo in disgust before leaving. Looking up at the sky, the boy wishes he could be free and live in the sky like the pilots he sees flying their planes through the clouds. The beautiful daughter of the Del Moral family, Fauna, is preparing to meet the Prince of the Levem Kingdom, Carlo, during the banquet in their mansion. Her father, Diego, comes to pick her up, while guests attending the banquet gossip about them, mentioning how she will have no choice but to go along with the rumored marriage proposal due to the kingdom backing them. Once she is brought to the banquet hall, Fauna meets Carlo for the first time. Carlo is smitten by her beauty and he immediately steps forward, proposing to her in front of all of the nobles. Unsure about how she should respond, she looks to her father for guidance, who gestures that she should accept his proposal. And so she gracefully does, which makes Carlo very happy. However, he does not want to go through with the marriage until their war with Amatsukami comes to an end. Because of that, he promises that he will win the war within a year and asks her to wait for him until he returns victorious. After the prince leaves, Diego reassures Fauna that this marriage will ensure the stability and position of their family. But years pass and the war still rages on. Fauna's personal aides are reassuring her that everything will be okay while they are preparing her for bed. It turns out the prince has been sending her personal letters pretty much every single day since they met. Once her aides retire from her chambers, Fauna finds it hard to fall asleep, so she goes to the window to catch some fresh air. It is then that she spots Amatsukami's airplanes approaching under the moonlit sky. Before she can react, they open fire on her mansion. In an instant, the entire building is set ablaze with their bombs. Just as quick as they came, they make their escape, leaving the devastated mansion behind. Thanks to her aides quickly rushing to her side, Fauna gets protected from the assault and survives. Unfortunately, her father does not meet the same fate as he perishes in the bombing. A funeral service is held shortly thereafter on which the generals from the military discuss the recent attack. It turns out Fauna was their intended target as they want to put an end to the wedding, which will in turn shatter the morale of Levam. Fearing that she is still in danger, Carlo notifies them that they are sending a special fleet to get her and escort her back to the mainland. With that, the two of them will finally be united and the day of their wedding seems to be drawing near at long last. A Levamian pilot is being pursued by a new model plane of the Amatsukami's military. He is unable to shake it off and ends up getting shot down. Just then, the pilot, the same boy from before, whose name is Charles, gets woken up by his comrade Joaquin. It turns out that it was all a nightmare he had, induced by what happened to him recently. The two of them go eat breakfast in the mess hall, where Charles gets abused by senior Levamian pilots, who berate him for being a bastardo and force their cleaning duty on him. Joaquin, who is part of the same mercenaries like Charles, stands up for him, and it seems like a fight is about to break out. But then a general suddenly walks into the mess hall and asks for Charles to join him in private. In the general's office, they first go through his background, where it is revealed that a bastardo is someone who is of mixed birth between a Levamian and an Amatsukamian, and because of that he is looked down upon. Despite that, Charles has an outstanding flight record, and has even managed to best their ace pilots during simulated flights. It is because of his accomplishments that he has been selected to fly Fauna to the mainland, but only if he thinks he is up for it. They refer to his flying expertise to plot a course and raise any concerns about the flight ahead. Charles is quick to plot the optimal route, and the only concern he has is the new model of planes the enemy has, which will be very difficult to evade on open seas. Hearing that, the general decides to give him at his disposal the best and fastest recon plane in their arsenal, the Santa Cruz. While it lacks any offensive armaments except for a defensive rear gun, it is by far the most mobile plane they have. Hearing that, Charles believes that the flight can be done, but is still worried that it will be hard to avoid running into enemy patrols. In order to combat that problem, the general declares that they will launch their entire fleet directly at the enemy to serve as a distraction for him. Surprised and confused, as the losses would be astronomical, Charles wonders why they would not use the special fleet sent from the mainland instead. It is then that the general reveals how the entire special fleet has been wiped out en route to them, and if the news of that reaches the public, with Fauna still here, it would be devastating for the country's stability. Thus, it is vital that the mission is a success. Hearing that, Charles quickly steels himself and declares that he will see the mission accomplished successfully. Once he leaves, the general is distraught that they must leave the fate of the princess to a bastardo of all people. When the news of Charles' special mission comes out, there is a big party among the mercenaries who are excited that one of their own is entrusted with such an important task. The following day, the general briefs the entire fleet about their mission, and once the briefing is over, Charles is brought before Fauna to meet her. The moment he lays his eyes on her, he remembers meeting her a long time ago as a child. Since he is forbidden from chatting with her, he is quickly dismissed while the generals go over the plan with the princess and get her ready for the flight. Making his way to the plane, Charles finds the princess aides arguing with the mechanics about all the luggage she has to bring along. Despite having sound arguments about weight limitations, the aides are relentless, so Charles signals the mechanics to let them be and gets in the plane to prepare for takeoff. Shortly thereafter, Fauna is escorted to the airstrip as well, geared up in a full-body protective suit for safety. Once she is strapped in, Charles gets the go-ahead and they take off. He quickly breaks the ice between them by letting her know that he will be counting on her to keep watch on their rear for any enemies during their journey. The start of the flight is very peaceful, with both of them enjoying the sight of the archipelago below. Charles uses the small islands for navigation to make sure they are on the charted course before climbing above the clouds. The day passes uneventfully, and when the sun sets, Charles lands the plane on the sea, so they can rest for the night. At the same time, he pulls out her excessive luggage and requests that she sorts the things she absolutely needs from the rest, as they are currently too heavy to fly at top speed, so if they run into enemies, they will not be able to evade them. Fauna reveals that she did not know how her luggage was a potential hazard, so she quickly starts sorting through it. But when one of the bags starts sliding down from the plane's wing, she tries grabbing on it and slips, falling into the water alongside it. Weighted down by the protective suit and not knowing how to swim, Fauna starts sinking quickly. Luckily for her, Charles jumps right after her and frees her from the heavy suit, which allows him to pull her out of the water. However, before they can recover, Charles spots an enemy fleet patrolling the area, so they make a fast getaway. With the rest of Fauna's luggage still on the wing, it all gets swept away by the wind and lost in the ocean. Fortunately for them, the enemy fleet does not spot them, so they are able to find a secluded spot behind some rocks for the night. Charles elaborates that they need to rest through the night because the plane needs to recharge its batteries, which it does by sucking up seawater. Noticing that they are both wet and that the temperature is dropping, Charles has them dry off their clothes by hanging them onto the plane. With the princess losing all of her spare clothes earlier, she has no choice but to use a blanket to cover herself up. While Charles sleeps inside of the cramped plane, he has Fauna sleeping through the night on an inflatable raft. Before she falls asleep, Fauna looks up into the starry sky and hums a soothing melody. Charles immediately recognizes that melody but does not comment on it, allowing the two of them to eventually drift asleep. In the morning, both of them are well rested and the plane is fully charged, so after packing up the raft, they put on their clothes and return to their journey. Shortly after takeoff, Fauna spots an enemy fleet scanning the area close to them, so Charles quickly alters their flight path in order to avoid them. Luckily, they remain undetected, but Charles is concerned that they are showing up so close to them again, wondering if they are actually aware of his mission. Once they are safe, Charles thanks Fauna for spotting them so quickly, warning her that they will definitely be shot down if they are ambushed by the enemy's brand new model planes. The rest of the day passes by quickly, and when they land to rest and recharge, Charles declares that at this pace they will reach their destination in 2 days. This surprises Fauna, as the destination does not seem to be the capital, but a group of islands. It is then that Charles reveals to her how he will not be flying her straight to the capital. Instead, another escort will arrive and pick her up there, pretending to be the last of the destroyed fleet, so they could pretend to the public how the wiped-out fleet heroically managed to escort the princess against all odds. Fauna wonders how Charles can be okay with that, since they will take all the glory away from him. But Charles quickly explains that he will be properly compensated, earning much more money than he could ever dream of as a mercenary. This will allow him to retire and live peacefully on a secluded island somewhere. Suddenly, Charles notices the sound of planes nearby. Quickly extinguishing the fire from the gas burner, he surveys the area with his binoculars and spots the enemy fleet searching for them. Although they did not spot them, he gets worried how they keep looking so close to their path. It is then that Fauna reveals how the prince sent her a message through official channels in which he discussed the details of her flight. Upon hearing that, Charles gets frustrated by how stupid the prince is, as he should be fully aware that those messages can be intercepted by the enemy, and even if they are encoded, there are means to decipher them. Not to mention the fact that his comrades charge the enemy head-on in vain now. Noticing the hopeless look on Fauna's face, Charles decides to put his grievances with the prince aside for now, and instead reassures her that their mission is still possible. But their journey will be a lot more dangerous now, so he will count on her to spot the enemy before they close in on them. This raises her spirit again, but just as they are about to turn in for the night, Fauna jumps back onto the plane from the raft and slips, falling into the sea. Knowing that she cannot swim, Charles follows quickly after her, saving her from drowning yet again. Once they set their clothes back up to dry, the two of them have a good laugh about it in the raft. It turns out she wanted to let him sleep next to her in the raft instead of the cramped plane so he can get some proper rest for change. In the end, he decides to take her up on the offer, When he dozes off, Charles dreams of his childhood. He remembers working at Fauna's family mansion as a gardener, where he was abused by the other staff for being a bastardo. After one such abuse, he found himself crying behind some trees. It is there that the young Fauna happened upon him and cheered him up. She was very kind and even gave him flowers, which was the first time a stranger was kind to him. Noticing that he dozed off, Fauna makes sure his blanket is properly keeping him warm before laying down and going to sleep as well. The following day, they are making good progress towards their destination, but the heavy overcast makes it hard for them to keep an eye out for enemies. Suddenly, Fauna mentions how she keeps seeing black spots in between the clouds instead of the usual rays of sun. Charles immediately realizes what that means, but it is already too late. Hiding in the clouds was the enemy fleet, and they had already surrounded them. Before Charles can even react, they fire homing missiles at them. This allows Charles to finally put his masterful piloting skills on display, as he does his best to avoid them. He even manages to bait the missiles following him into hitting their own ship, destroying it in the process. Just as it seems like they are in the clear, a squad of the new type planes shows up and fires. They manage to hit their mark, breaking the glass of the cockpit and badly injuring Charles. When Fauna notices that Charles has been hit, she panics and tries to use the gun to fire back at their pursuers. But she does not know how to get the gun to work, so in the end, she just resigns herself to her fate. Their pursuers get ready to finish them off, but Charles collects himself just in time to hit the overboost of the plane, giving them the speed they need to have a chance of shaking off the enemy. Despite the injury, Charles relies on his instincts to dodge the incoming fire, promising Fauna that he will keep her safe no matter what. Assessing the state his body is in, he asks Fauna to keep talking to him, so that he does not pass out. In order to keep him talking and focused, she reminds him of the prize that awaits him. But Charles reveals that the prize is not really what he is after. It turns out that this is his first mission in which he is supposed to save a life and not take it, so it is very important to him to finish this mission. Their chat proves to be exactly what he needed to remain focused as he avoids the enemy for long enough, baiting their planes so far out that they are ordered to abort the pursuit and retreat to the main ship. Finally safe from their pursuers, the two of them breathe a sigh of relief and relax. Because of that, Charles passes out, but Fauna notices that they are flying straight into the Great Falls, so she shouts as loud as she can, stirring him awake just in time for him to turn the plane and avoid crashing into the cliffs. She continues talking to him, reassuring him that it is almost over, which keeps him awake just enough to find a safe landing spot on a nearby island. Once they land, Fauna quickly assesses Charles' injuries. At this point, he is completely passed out, so she drags him out of the plane and tends to his wounds. Once she is done, she holds his hand and sings him the lullaby from the melody she hummed the other day, doing her best to soothe him and ease his pain. Charles stirs from his slumber for a few moments, only to see her sing for him, before exhaustion washes over him once again. When she sees that he has calmed down and is resting peacefully, she takes some time to gather her thoughts and figure out what she wants to do from here on out. When Charles wakes up, he is immediately greeted by Fauna, who has made quite an obvious change in her appearance, namely cutting her long, beautiful hair because she thought it was getting in the way. Wasting no time, Charles inspects the damage done to the plane, stating how he will need to hide it and spend some time fixing it up before they can continue their journey. But instead of relying on him for everything, Fauna insists that she will help him out this time around. Seeing how serious she is about that, Charles allows her to do so, instructing her how she can do just that. When an enemy plane patrols above the island, they manage to remain undetected thanks to the camouflage of leaves they put onto the Santa Cruz. Finally finishing the repair work on the plane, they take some time to relax and stroll around the small island, enjoying the sights. Upon finding a beautiful field covered with countless flowers, they decide to rest for a while. Charles brings up the lullaby she sang to him, revealing that it was his mother who sang the same lullaby to him, and that he and his mother used to work at her mansion a long time ago. Fauna is surprised to hear that, reasoning that his mother must have been the one who taught her that song. She tells him how she had trouble falling asleep when she was little, and his mother would keep her company, even when she was not allowed to do so, just so she could make sure Fauna is able to fall asleep. During those times, she sang that lullaby to her, which always lulled her to sleep. But during one such night, her father found out about it and banished his mother, and in turn him from the mansion. When Fauna wonders how his mother is doing now, Charles reveals that she passed away not long after they left the mansion, which causes Fauna to break down in tears, holding herself responsible for her banishment and in turn death, even though she was the one who has shown her what it means to be kind. But Charles comforts her, telling her how her words would make his mother very happy, and that she should not be so harsh towards herself. Hearing his words, Fauna changes her mind about continuing their journey. Instead, she wants to elope with him and break free from the responsibility of her family name. Charles is quick to remind her how everyone's wishes are for her to safely reach their destination. But she quickly retorts, wondering if her own wish does not matter at all. Upset, she grabs a bottle of alcohol they had with them and chugs it down, quickly getting intoxicated. In that state, she argues with Charles, calling him a coward. While Charles tries to convince her to stop drinking, she insists that he dances with her instead. But Charles does not know how, so she takes it upon herself to teach him in her intoxicated state. Soon enough, they trip and fall, landing on top of each other. Even with that opportunity, Charles does not make a move on her, pulling her back onto her feet again and making sure she is okay instead. This causes her to break down in tears, so he remains by her side, comforting her and humming the lullaby to her until she falls asleep. The following day, they are ready to return to the journey. Fauna feels bad about what happened last night, but Charles quickly moves past it, focusing only on the mission, and is not upset at her in the slightest. While flying, Fauna requests that Charles teaches her how to fire that gun they have in the back. Just as he is finished explaining the mechanism behind it to her, he hears the deep rumble of airship engines above them. Surely enough, they find themselves flying into yet another ambush. The enemy's large ships intercept them and start bombarding them with all the firepower they can muster. But even that is not enough to shoot down the ace pilot Charles, who manages to skillfully dodge all of their shells. Just as it seems that they are in the clear, one new model-type plane appears on their tail. Charles reasons that it is a better idea to send one very skilled pilot after a target instead of a bunch of mediocre ones. This appears to be exactly the case, as the Amatsukamian pilot challenges him to a traditional one-on-one duel in the sky, much like the samurai of old did before the pilot era. Figuring that this is their best bet, Charles accepts the duel and their dogfight begins. That being said, all Charles can do is try to evade and shake off the enemy, since his only weapon is on his rear. Charles uses all of the tricks in his book, doing his absolute best to shake off the foe, but to no avail. This gets to his nerves and he starts panicking, but Fauna snaps him out of it by telling him that she believes in him. Deciding to use his ultimate maneuver, Charles attempts to shake the pursuer off one last time. Even that proves to be insufficient against the new model-type plane. Just as the Amatsukamian ace gets close enough to fire, Charles yells out Fauna's name, giving her the signal to fire. Just as instructed, she pulls the trigger and unloads onto the pursuing plane, which fires back. Both planes dump lead towards each other, and in the end, it is the Amatsukamian new model type that is defeated, as Fauna shoots off a part of its wing, making it impossible for the pilot to continue the dogfight. Before pulling away and continuing his mission, Charles gives him a respectful salute, which the foe returns, acknowledging their skill. Finally, Charles reaches their destination, landing the plane out of sight while waiting for the ship from the capital to come pick the princess up. Fauna feels sad about leaving the Santa Cruz behind, which makes Charles call her a pilot, telling her how all pilots feel that way towards their planes. She invites him to accompany her to the capital, but Charles is quick to explain how that is not possible, reminding her how the news that a mercenary escorted her would not sit well, not to mention his mixed blood. Since he is adamant about not escorting her back, she asks if he would not just accompany her on the ship instead, but he refuses to do that as well, stating how he would not get his reward then. Once the fact that she will not be able to convince him to join her sets in, Fauna stops trying to convince him to do so. When the ship from the capital arrives, Charles bids Fauna farewell and wishes her all the best. She returns the sentiment and gives him a parting hug, which is promptly interrupted by the soldiers who arrive to get the princess. Their commander violently separates Charles from Fauna, even stealing some of the gold from the reward he handed over to him, stating that this will keep him quiet about what he saw here. Fauna protests about the way they are treating Charles, but the soldiers ignore her protests and strong-arm her to the ship. Looking at the sack of gold he was given, Charles cannot help but feel bad about the way they parted. Once she is aboard the ship, Fauna immediately complains to the captain about the way they treated her savior. The commander who brought her in quickly spins the story, telling everyone how Charles must have pretended to be a better person than he really is. After all, he is nothing but a greedy mercenary. At that moment, they spot the Santa Cruz flying next to the ship. Fauna realizes that Charles must be trying to see her off, so she demands to be allowed on deck, but the soldiers block her path. The commander speaks up again, reminding her that she has no power to issue orders until she actually marries the prince. But Fauna has had enough of bowing her head and listening to others, so she stands her ground and demands from the commander to back off. This surprises him and he falls over, spilling the gold he took from Charles from his pockets. Witnessing all of that unfold, the captain of the ship gives his men the order to let her through. Fauna dashes as fast as she can towards the deck, where she is spotted by Charles from his plane. Both of them are happy that they are able to bid each other farewell properly. Before parting from her for the last time, Charles utilizes his flying skills to treat her to a beautiful dance performance, the only way he knows how in air, to show her what is truly important to him. Charles starts dumping the gold he got as a reward above the ship, showering it with a rain of gold dust. Once the performance is finished, he turns his plane back home, waving one last goodbye to Fauna before disappearing into the distance.